The bottom line of good counseling, whether it's pastoral or clinical, is to identify the lies that people believe about themselves, about others, and about God.
Thank you, Dr. Plum, for your time today. I'm so excited to hear from you and learn from you and get some wisdom as a minister. Yeah, so looking forward. Now, you've been a minister with the Assemblies of God since 1982, is what I heard. Mm-hmm. And now you're continuing to minister as a professor of counseling at Evangel University. Correct. That is an incredible ministry, by the way. But I don't think a lot of people know your story, and I've never heard your story personally either. So how did God lead you to where you're at today?
Oh, wow, He's been so faithful. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I grew up in a Christian home. I was accepted the Lord at 5 years old and started in kind of doing ministry at 13. So it's been 45 years, and I always knew God had a call on my life and wasn't quite sure what that would look like. Thought maybe missions, and began just to continually seek Him and obey Him. I've always been fascinated with why people do what they do. I can never figure out, when somebody's born, nobody ever wants their life to implode. What happened, and to cause that. So I've always been fascinated with people, and a couple years ago my mom shared my second grade report card, and it said, Melody would be a really good student if she wasn't always trying to solve everybody's problems. So I think I came by it at a young age naturally, and I grew up in a family that was service and ministry minded, so always involved with people, whether teaching, coaching, on staff at a church. And then there was two significant events that happened in my life in my early 30s. I was working on staff at a church, and I just had so many kids and adolescents come to me and tell me their problems, being abused, different things, and I wanted to help them, but I didn't really know how. And I began seeking information. How do I do this? And then I had a family member that was diagnosed with a significant mental illness. And people were saying it's just spiritual, he's under attack. And other people saying it's biological, he needs medicine. And I kept thinking, well, maybe it's both and more. And began to look for some answers for that. And so in my early 30s, it was a transition time. I began seeking God's will. And long story short, He had me sell my house and take a leave of absence from my job. And I moved to Springfield, Missouri, with the intention of staying 2 years, and 25 years later, I'm still here. But at the time, it was the only Assemblies of God college that I knew had a master's degree in counseling, and I wanted a degree in Christian counseling, and really planned to go back to California and continue my ministry and teaching. And I had two professors that really saw something in me I didn't see, and one of them challenged me to go on and get my doctorate. And he said at the time the Assemblies of God was really they needed women with doctorates to teach, and he said, you go and get it, you could probably teach at any Assemblies of God college, and you could probably have my job. And I said, oh, Dr. Lee, you're funny. And he said, no, I'm serious. And long story short, I ended up taking his job when he retired. Amazing. And I went and got my doctorate, and then went back to the Assemblies of God Theological Seminary and taught there for 15 years and headed their counseling department. And then in 2014, when we consolidated, I moved over to Evangel, and I've been there the last 5 years. So,
are we thankful for those men in your life, in our lives, who champion you and just really see the things that you never saw?
Unbelievable. I've just been so blessed with wonderful men in my life, from my father down to my colleagues that I work with. I just, Assemblies of God has been very good to me as a woman in ministry, and been open to a different call. I had no clue that God would call me into mental health. It wasn't on my radar in a sense, but God is creative, and He's amazing what He'll do.
He is, and that mental health issue has been a huge talk in our day today, and you're just so poised for the right opportunity and to minister and nurture people. And I've heard that so many times as a local pastor. Sometimes I feel not equipped to be able to minister to people, because spiritual counseling, pastoral counseling, is a completely different thing from clinical counseling. And so I feel that, but I don't fully understand what are the difference. So what are they?
Many things are the same, but there's a lot of differences. The similarities is you use the same skills of listening, reflective, caring. We pastoral counselors and clinical counselors all have the desire to help people. That's our goal, and we honor confidentiality, those issues. And both allow spirituality into the session. It's just a little different. And both are concerned with soul care. And the bottom line of good counseling, whether it's pastoral or clinical, is to identify the lies that people believe about themselves, about others, and about God. And trying to inject the truth. What's the truth? And so they both do that, because the truth is what sets us free, whether that's the big T or the small t, just psychological truth. So that's how they're similar. How they differ is in quite a few different ways. First of all is the use of spirituality. Both can use it, but if you go to a pastoral counselor, you expect them to be kind of overtly spiritual and incorporate spirituality into the session. With a clinical counselor, you have the option to do that, and you can if it's what the client wants. They bring it in, you're free to do that. So it's more subtle, but it's there. Pastoral counseling is concerned about soul care and may be informed clinically and psychologically, whereas a professional counselor is operating from a theories base and will use evidence-based treatments that have been proven from research. And pastoral counselors don't give a diagnosis. Clinical counselors will come up with some diagnosis and with a treatment plan. They're both different on how they're governed. So for example, a pastoral counselor answers to an ecclesiastical board, a church denomination. Professional counselors, psychologists operate under a legal and a governmental authority, so there's some ethical mandates there. The training and education, professional counselors, or in mental health you have a certain education requirements and training. Pastoral counselors can vary. You can have some that have a degree, and you can have others that it's just a calling, so there's that difference. And then finances. A professional counselor is typically paid, and we'll just see you in the office with one session, and you don't socialize outside. Somebody that does pastoral counseling, you may see them at church or go to coffee. That it's a more fluid relationship, the structure. And then probably one of the bigger issues is the scope of what you deal with. As a pastoral counselor, you're dealing more with individual issues, maybe some family. Person has conflicts between their behaviors and their values. They're doing something they don't feel right about, and they're struggling with that. Where in a clinical counselor, you're going to deal with more clinical issues with major depression, anxiety, psychosis, those types of things. And it's important wherever you're offering help that you do no harm. That's the first ethical mandate for a professional is we may want to help people, but above all, do no harm. And so we operate under those ethical mandates. But those are some of the general differences between the two.
And I see a lot of similarities too.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. As a local minister, how do I know when we're having a pastoral counseling, how do I know that this individual needs to move on to the clinical counseling?
Good question. I get asked that a lot. My personal belief is that as a pastoral counselor, you should limit yourself to 3 to 5 sessions and do a short-term strategic approach. If it's going to take more than that to see some resolution to the issue, it's probably good to refer. If there's maybe the possibility of needing medication to help with anxiety or depression. If you're unfamiliar with the terms DSM-4, that's a good time. If you don't know what that means, anytime there's any type of self-harm, suicide involved like that, it's important that you refer right away. Anything that you could harm the person. And I've seen many well-intentioned people in ministry want to do help, but they don't know what they're doing and can dig up stuff or bring more harm than good, and we never want to do that. So when in doubt, always ask for help.
Yes.
I had a situation one time where a pastor called me and said, I need some advice. We've been with this man for 24 hours praying for him in his bathroom, and his wife and his family, and we're interceding, and he keeps sandpapering his nose, and we God's not answering our prayers, and we need I said, this guy needs to see a psychiatrist. He has a diagnosable mental disorder, and they got him in to see a psychiatrist. They put him on medicines, and but the pastor and the family and all of them were spending their time trying to fix something that was out of their scope of help. And to me, they always err on the side of safety. Yeah. If you're not sure, and you then refer and get help. There's wonderful people out there to help.
Yes, and even having that resource, who can I refer to is probably another big question. Now, this mental issue has been an ongoing topic, even more so today, and I hear people talking about anxiety and depression and suicide all the time, and it even affects ministers. And we just recently heard this really disheartening news as a minister who's proponent of this type of minister just kind of took his own life and is not here anymore. So how do we deal with that kind of situation, and what are some of your observations to specifically ministers dealing with these mental issues?
Really good question, and I was terribly sad to see that happen, and it's again one too many. I grew up in the ministry. My dad was a pastor, and my mom a pastor's wife, and honestly a co-pastor, so I'm well aware of the issues in the ministry. I think there's probably 5 things that I would contribute it to. Number one would be the breakdown of the nuclear family and the family. We were created to be in safe, loving relationships. And with the breakdowns of marriages and families, people are just lonely, more isolated with the increase of technology. Families are on their phone. There's a lot of that. The continued need to keep up with what you see on Facebook that creates stuff. The second thing I would say is probably I see the decline of religion and religious institutions in America. We're always getting reports from Barnum and different things how religion is diminishing in the country, and for all its good and bad, the church is a very powerful thing and a good thing. It gives structure to family and communities, and we know research shows us that people that have a spiritual base have better psychological health, less depression, less anxiety. It gives life meaning, and without something bigger than us, that's going to cause depression and anxiety. The third thing that I would probably attribute it to is what I call just the sexualization of our society. I've been in ministry 45 years now, and from when I started to now to see how young children are being sexualized and exposed to sex and sexual issues. Developmentally, they're not ready for that. And research shows us that the kids that engage in sexual experiences too early are more prone to depression, anxiety, and with the increase of pornography, that has exacerbated a lot of issues with sexual abuse. Whether it happens now more than it did in the past, I don't know, but we know about it more. More people are coming out. But research shows us that by the time you're 18, 1 in 3 women and 1 to 4 or 5 men have been sexually assaulted or abused. And the ramifications of sexual abuse are, there's so many, but anxiety, depression, suicide, shame. So that contributes a lot. And Satan hates sexuality. He hates God's gift of sexuality because that is the only act that recreates God's image. And so he comes at it with a forceful vengeance. The fourth thing I think is our society of self-absorbed narcissism. We are a society that's about self, and healthy spirituality has a balance. And research shows us again that the most happy people are those that give. And to be self-absorbed in your happiness will lead to depression, anxiety, what's the purpose? The happiest people are those that give and serve. And then the final thing I would say is, the fifth one would be the globalization of the world, technology, and living post 9/11. Many of my students that I have now have never known life before 9/11 and the terrorists, and that has impacted them developmentally, growing up in a society of anxiety, and then seeing it all the time on TV. I sound old, but when I grew up, we didn't have that. There was things happening, but we didn't know. Yeah. And this generation of college students are the most anxious we've seen in college campuses, just the high levels of anxiety. And I think that's in part from seeing too much stuff. Yeah. The scripture tells us in Philippians 4:8, one of my favorite scriptures, fix your thoughts on what's true, what's honorable, what's right, pure, lovely, and admirable. Think on these things. These are excellent, worthy of praise. And I think inundating our mind with all of the things that we do is depressing. What that we do with the media can be depressing. And those are the 5 things that I personally think have really contributed to the increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide.
Great observations. And those are our people. In school, in the classroom, I teach also, and so I see that often in some of my students and in my congregation, and it's so heartbreaking, and we want to help. So as a pastor who wants to help these generation dealing with this, I know that there are differences, counseling part and the pastoral part, but for local pastors who may not have a resources to hire on a professional clinical counselor, what is our best next option so we can be the best minister we are called to be?
I appreciate that question, because I have a passion for the local church to equip ministers, because I know, just as my father and mother in ministry for 30 years, they didn't have the resources that they needed. My dad was smart enough, it's interesting, 25, 30 years ago, he even brought in a psychologist to speak to our church and educate us. And how he knew to do that is kind of a little surprising, but he did. But I work at Evangel, and we have a program there where we're training men and women to be professional Christian counselors in the community, to come alongside pastors. And most communities have professional counselors, and they have those that are Christians. And I've been lucky here in Springfield. I've probably had 12, maybe a dozen churches that will refer parishioners to me that I can help. And they're out there. The clinicians are out there who this is their calling, this is their ministry, to not go against the church or diminish that, but to come alongside the pastor who are trained. So, for a pastor, find out what's in your community as far as professional counselors. Ask people in your church, if any of you go to counseling or therapy, can you give me a list of who you go to that I can refer to? I've had pastors call me and say, I'd love to come and meet you, go for lunch, and talk to you about your approach. I'm more than willing. Call a counselor and ask them. I've had numerous churches support financially. They'll pay for 3 or 4 sessions for somebody in the church to come see me, and we'll try to get a plan. So financially help, because services are expensive and insurance doesn't, always cover that. That is one difference between pastoral and clinical. Clinical, you do get paid by insurance. Pastoral usually doesn't. So next thing I would do is look at your resources in your community. There's a lot of resources that pastors just aren't aware of. Like here in Springfield, just right down the street from here, we have the Victim Center, which offers free counseling for survivors of victims of abuse, car accidents, any of that kind of stuff, free. There's lots of resources in the community. Fourth, I would encourage pastors to have counselors, psychologists come in and speak. Have a mental health awareness day one Sunday a month, where somebody comes in and addresses these issues, what the resources are. I've been at one church here where they did a Wednesday night psychoeducational thing on, one week it was depression, one week was anxiety, and they brought in different mental health professionals, and it was packed. We had a panel, a table of psychologists, counselors, and it was very well received. And then as a pastor, I would keep a good bibliography, a good list. Bibliotherapy is a great approach that you can recommend, good books that are psychologically informed and spiritually sound. The American Association of Christian Counselors has just a wide variety of resources and others. And kind of what you'd mentioned earlier, get some more education yourself. There's lots of online programs now that you can take in pastoral care, counseling. We have many master's programs in counseling at our schools. I'm plugging Evangel really right now because I teach there, and we have accreditation take a class and educate yourself somewhere. Knowledge never hurts you, and with the increasing issues that we're seeing, I was at a conference recently, and one of the speakers who's worked for years with trauma said that she believes trauma is the mission, survivors of trauma is the mission field for this generation. And I agree with that. There's just a lot of hurting people who need to see a Jesus with skin on, whether that's in a pastoral care office or a clinical. And it's an important decision for the person to make, and needs to be aware of the advantages and disadvantages of both.
Yeah. I think our conversation today was just so timely. We needed to hear that for the betterment of the work of the Lord, really. And we need each other. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and I just cherish it. I feel enriched and equipped to do what I need to do to serve other people better. So thank you so much for your time again. God bless you for all you do.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you.